Chapter 8. The Hollow Man. The man didn't attack. He just stood there, staring at the glowing watch in Cade's hand. "The weight!" the man croaked, his voice sounding like sandpaper on stone. "Do you feel it? The weight of the ghost cache?" "Who are you?" Cade asked, keeping his distance. "I was the navigator," the man said, a ghostly laugh escaping his throat. "Vance's favorite. He sent me ahead to find the valley. But you don't find the valley finds you when you have enough blood on your hands." He pointed a shaking finger at Cade. "You have the watch, you have the key, but you don't have the stomach for what comes next. Vance is coming, and he isn't coming for the gold anymore. He's coming to see if you'll break just like your father did." The man lunged then, not to hurt Cade, but to grab the watch. Reeves stepped in, knocking the man back, but the Hollow Man simply collapsed into a heap, sobbing about the shimmering gold that lived in the shadows. "We have to move," Reeves said, looking at the ridge. "If this lunatic is here, the resurrectionists are right behind him." As they mounted their horses, Cade looked back at the Hollow Man. The man had stopped crying. He was staring at the moon, a terrifyingly lucid smile on his face. "See you at the Iron Bridge, boy," the man whispered. Cade looked at the man, a shivering wreck of skin and bone. Despite the danger, despite the edgy pragmatism Reeve preached, Cade couldn't leave a man to be slaughtered by Vance's vultures. "We can't just leave him to be picked apart," Cade said, dismounting. "He's a ghost in a living body, Cade. He'll slow us down, and he's half mad," Reeve argued, but Marin was already reaching into her pack for a strip of dried meat and a spare canteen. "He knows the way to the Iron Bridge," Marin noted. "If we leave him, we lose our only guide." Through the blind canyons, they hoisted the Hollow Man, who muttered his name was Elias, onto the back of Reeves' horse. The act of mercy felt heavy, a physical weight added to their escape. As they rode out of the box canyon, the sound of Vance's riders echoed behind them, a rhythmic drumming of hooves that signaled the end of their Head Start Chapter 9. The Irons Bridge. The earth simply ended. One moment we were weaving through the jagged teeth of the Badlands. The next, we were staring into a mile-wide throat of red dust and shadow. Spanning the void was the trestle, a skeleton of rusted Union iron that looked like it had been built by a madman. "The Iron Bridge," Reeve whispered, his horse dancing back from the crumbling edge. "I heard the wind used to sing through the girders. Now it just sounds like it's screaming." Elias, the Hollow Man, began to thrash against his bindings on the back of the saddle. His eyes were blown wide, reflecting the sheer drop. "The rivets!" he shrieked, pointing a skeletal finger at the rusted bolts. "The gold is in the rivets, every one of them forged in greed. Don't let the weight pull us down." "Ignore him," Marin said, though her face was the color of bleached bone. She dismounted and knelt, inspecting the first few feet of the rail. "The timber is rotted, but the iron is mostly sound. If we walk the horses one by one, we might make it. If we stay here, Vance's men will have us pinned against the rim by sunrise." We started across. Every step was a gamble. The wind howled through the chasm, tugging at my duster, trying to pull me into the dark. Beneath us, the canyon floor was a blur of shadows 1,000 feet down. We were halfway across when the world groaned. A sickening crack echoed through the canyon, the sound of ancient wood finally giving up. A 20-foot section of the track ahead of us tilted, the timber supports splintering away into the abyss. The horses reared, their hooves clattering dangerously close to the edge of the remaining iron. "The switch!" Marin shouted over the roar of the wind. She pointed to a rusted manual lever hanging off a service platform 10 feet below the brake. "It's a counterweight system. If that switch isn't thrown to lock the secondary girders, the whole center span is going to slide." "I can't reach it." Reeve yelled, struggling to keep the panicked horses from bolting off the bridge. I looked at the frayed maintenance rope dangling from a rusted pulley above the gap. It was thin, weathered by decades of desert sun, and swaying violently in the full gale. "Cade, don't," Reeve warned, seeing the look in my eye. "Your father had the same look before he tried to outrun a bullet. It's a suicide jump." "My father didn't have a choice," I rasped, handing him the reins of my horse. "I do. I didn't think about the height. I didn't think about the vulture watching from the ridges behind us." I lunged, my fingers caught the rough hemp of the rope, the fibers biting into my calloused palms. I swung out into the empty air, the wind spinning me like a top. For a heartbeat, I was suspended over nothing, looking down into the belly of the world. I kicked off a rusted strut, swinging my body toward the service platform. My boots hit the metal grating with a jarring clang. I scrambled for the lever. It was frozen, seized by years of grit and rust. "Push!" Marin screamed from above. I threw my entire weight against the iron bar. My muscles screamed. The silver watch in my pocket pressed hard against my ribs. With a scream of metal on metal, the lever gave way. The bridge shuddered, the secondary girders grinding into place with a bone-shaking thud. The span was stable, for now. I climbed back up the rope, my hands shaking so hard I could barely grip the rail. When I reached the top, Reeve looked at me, a new, grim respect in his eyes. "You got nerves, kid," he grunted. "Your father would have been proud, or terrified." "Let's just get off this birdcage," I said, looking back. On the far rim, a single black figure sat atop a horse, watching us. Even from a mile away, I knew it was Vance. He didn't fire. He just lifted his hat in a slow, mocking salute before turning his horse back into the shadows. "Don't even think about it," Marin said, her voice tight as she watched Cade eye the rusted support pins. "That bridge is held together by habit and luck. You pull one bolt, and the vibration alone will take the whole span down while we're still on the transition plates." "She's right," Reeve added, urging his horse onto the solid ground of the far rim. "We touch that iron again. We're just building our own coffin. Besides, Vance is a vulture. He doesn't need the bridge if he can find a way to fly. He'll find a bypass or he'll make his men climb. We use the time we just bought to disappear." They scrambled onto the red dirt of the northern rim, the horses' hooves finally hitting stable earth. Behind them, the iron bridge groaned in, the wind, a skeletal monument to a war that refused to stay buried. Chapter 10. The Outlaw's Parlor. The trail led them into the throat of a narrow canyon where the sun never quite reached the floor. This was the back door to Brimstone, a town that didn't appear on any map. It was a vertical shantytown with saloons and storefronts carved directly into the sandstone cliffs, connected by a web of rope ladders and precarious wooden catwalks. "Keep your heads down and your hands near your steel," Reeve warned, adjusting his hat to shadow his face. "In Brimstone, a man's life is worth exactly what's in his pockets. And right now, we're carrying a king's ransom in paper." The air in the canyon was thick with the smell of coal smoke and cheap tobacco. Men with hollow eyes watched them from the galleries above. They reached the Gilded Cage, a saloon built into a natural cavern. It was the only place to trade for fresh horses, but the proprietor, a man named Gideon, didn't take coin. "I have enough gold to fill a graveyard," Gideon said, leaning over a table scarred by card games and knife fights. He was a mountain of fight, a man with a beard braided with silver wire. "I want something unique, something with a story." He looked at the bulge in Cade's pocket. "That watch, I've seen the glow of radium before. It belongs to a man who owes me a great deal of blood. Vance Thorne." The room went silent. The clink of glasses stopped. "I won it," Cade lied, his voice steadier than he felt. "Is that so?" Gideon smiled, revealing a row of yellowed teeth. Then win me these horses. On one hand of Dead Man's hand. You win, you get the best mounts in the territory. You lose, well, I've always wanted a watch that tells the time in the dark. Cade sat down. The deck was greasy, the air was cold, and across the table, Gideon's eyes were as hard as flint. Marin stood behind Cade, her hand resting on the small of her back where her tools were hidden. Cade dealt the cards. As he looked at his hand, he felt the silver watch vibrate against his leg. It wasn't a mechanical hum, it was a rhythmic pulse. He looked at the cards, aces and eights, the black suit. Cade felt the rhythm through the fabric of his trousers. Thrum, thrum. Thrum, thrum, like a heartbeat made of ticking gears. It was impossible. The watch was a machine of springs and oil, yet it was reacting to Gideon as if it recognized a predator. He looked at his hand. The aces and eights. The dead man's hand. Legend said Wild Bill was holding these same cards when he took a bullet to the back of the head. "The bet is set, boy," Gideon rumbled, his massive rings clicking against the wooden table. "Show 'em or fold 'em." Cade ignored the sweat stinging his eyes. He focused on the pulse. As his hand hovered over his cards, the vibration changed. A buy, sharp, jagged stutter whenever his fingers moved toward the eight of spades. But when he touched the ace of clubs, the pulse smoothed into a warm, steady hum. "It's talking to me," Cade realized with a jolt of terror. Gideon slammed his cards down. 3 kings and a pair of jacks. A full house. The outlaws in the shadows. Let out a collective low whistle. It was a winning hand in any parlor from here to Independence. "Too bad," Gideon sneered, reaching for the silver watch. "I'll wear it in your memory." "Not yet," Cade said. He didn't play the eights. Guided by the steady hum of the watch, he discarded them and drew from the deck. The pulse went frantic, a high-pitched mechanical whine only he could hear. He flipped his cards. 4 aces. The silence in the gilded cage turned heavy. Gideon's face darkened, the silver wires in his beard twitching. "No one is that lucky, kid. Not even a thorn." "It's not luck," Cade said, standing up and sliding the watch back into his pocket. The vibration died down instantly, leaving his leg numb. "It's a debt paid. Give us the horses." Gideon stared at him for a long, agonizing minute, his hand twitching near the heavy Bowie knife at his belt. Finally, he spat on the floor and gestured to the back stable. "Take the bays and get out of my sight before I decide I'd rather have your head than a story." Chapter 11. Betrayal's First Breath. They rode out of Brimstone under the cover of a sulphurous fog that rolled off the canyon floor. The new horses were strong, their muscles bunching with power as they climbed toward the high ridges. But the victory at the card table felt hollow. Cade couldn't stop thinking about the watch. It wasn't just a map. It was alive in a way he didn't understand. "You played like a pro back there," Marin said, pulling her horse alongside his. She looked tired, her brass goggles hanging around her neck. "Where did you learn to read a deck like that?" "I didn't," Cade admitted. "The watch. It did something." Marin's expression shifted, not to wonder, but to a sharp, clinical suspicion. That night, while Cade pretended to sleep by the fire, he watched her through cracked eyelids. She crawled away from the camp, moving with the silence of a cat. She reached a high point overlooking the valley and pulled a small metallic cylinder from her boot. With a series of practiced clicks, she adjusted a lens. A rhythmic flash of light pulsed out into the darkness, a signal. Cade felt a cold knot tie itself in his stomach. "She's signaling the Union scouts," a voice whispered. Cade bolted upright. Reeve was sitting in the shadows, his rifle across his lap. He hadn't been sleeping either. "She's a loyalist, Cade," Reeve said, his voice flat. "She doesn't want the gold for us, and she doesn't want it for Vance. She wants to hand it back to the same government that sent your father to his grave. To her, we're just the pack mules." Cade looked from Reeve to the silhouette of Marin on the ridge. The friends he was relying on were held together by strings of secrets, and those strings were starting to fray. Cade lay back down, pulling his duster tight around his shoulders. The thrum of the watch against his hip felt like a warning, now a reminder that every piece of this puzzle, the gold, the watch, and even his friends, had a hidden edge. "I'll wait," Cade whispered into the collar of his coat. Reeve nodded once, a grim shadow in the firelight. "Smart. In the desert, you don't shoot at a shadow until you see the eyes." The next morning, Marin returned to camp with a bright, false smile and a story about scouting the perimeter for resurrectionists. Cade didn't blink. He just helped her saddle the horses, watching the way her fingers trembled slightly. She was scared. Whether she was scared of Vance or the people she had signaled, Cade couldn't tell. Chapter 12. The Sandstorm. The sky turned the color of a bruised plum by noon. The air didn't just get hot, it got heavy, smelling of ozone and ancient dust. "Wall of grit coming," Reeve shouted, pointing toward the horizon. A literal mountain of sand, thousands of feet high, was rolling toward them across the flats. They scrambled for the only cover they could find, a narrow crack in a limestone bluff that led into a series of low-ceilinged caves. They barely got the horses inside before the world turned white. The wind roared outside like a freight train, scouring the rocks and blocking the entrance with a drift of sand in seconds. They were trapped in a space no bigger than a parlor, the air thick with the dust that filtered through the cracks. Marin struck a match, the flame flickering in the thin air. "We're stuck until it passes," she said, her voice shaking. "Maybe?" A voice came from the back of the cave. A man stepped out of the deeper shadows. He wasn't dusty. He looked as if he had been sitting in a drawing room, his black coat pristine. Vance Thorne sat on a crate, cleaning his fingernails with a small, silver-handled knife. "The wind out there is quite a choir, isn't it?" Vance asked, not looking up. "It's the sound of the world trying to erase us." A very honest sound. Reeve went for his gun, but Vance didn't move. He just pointed the knife toward the ceiling. "I wouldn't. The vibrations in this cave are delicate. One gunshot, and we all become part of the geological record." Vance looked at Cade. "Come here, boy. Let's talk about your father. Let's talk about why he really stole that gold." Cade stepped forward, his heart hammering. "He stole it because he was a thief. That's what you said." "I lied," Vance said simply, standing up. He moved close, his presence cold and suffocating. "He stole it because the Union Army was going to use it to buy a new type of chemical weapon to end the war early. Thousands of civilians would have burned. Your father didn't steal for greed, Cade. He stole for mercy. He was a hero. And I'm the one who had to kill him for it." Cade felt the world tilt. The edgy truth was far worse than the legend. His father wasn't a villain, but he had died a traitor's death anyway. Cade looked into Vance's eyes. They were as clear and cold as mountain glass. For a second, the story made sense. It gave the hollow ache in Cade's chest a purpose. But then he saw the way Vance's thumb stroked the handle of his knife, a rhythmic, predatory habit. Vance wasn't giving Cade a legacy. He was giving him a leash. "You're lying," Cade whispered, his voice gaining strength. "You don't care about mercy or chemical weapons. You just want me to believe I'm like you, so I'll hand over the key." Vance's smile didn't fade. It sharpened. "Believe what you need to, boy. But remember, the desert doesn't care about your reasons. It only cares about who is left standing when the wind stops." Chapter 13. The silent mine. When the storm finally died, the world was unrecognizable. The dunes had shifted, burying the landmarks they knew and revealing things that had been hidden for decades. One of those things was the maw, the entrance to the Lost Hope mine. It wasn't like the mines in Bitter Creek. There were no timber supports here, no rusted ore carts. The entrance was a perfect hexagonal tunnel cut directly into a vein of white quartz. As they stepped inside, the first thing Cade noticed was the silence. It wasn't just the absence of sound, it was a heavy, pressurized quiet that made his ears throb. "The air is different here," Marin whispered, her fingers tracing the smooth, crystalline walls. "It's pressurized. This isn't a mine. It's a vault." As they moved deeper, the silver watch began to act up. It didn't just pulse, it began to emit a low, harmonic hum that vibrated through Cade's ribs. The radium dial glowed so brightly it cast long, dancing shadows against the white quartz. "Look at the floor," Reeve cautioned, lowering his lantern. Scattered across the quartz floor were the remains of the original extraction team. These weren't skeletons in rags. The high mineral content in the air had partially petrified them. They looked like statues of men caught in a moment of pure terror. Some were reaching for the exit. Others were curled in fetal positions, clutching their ears. "What killed them?" Cade asked, his voice echoing unnaturally. "The mine did," Marin said, pointing to the ceiling. Huge, jagged crystals hung like chandeliers. "These are resonant crystals. If the wind hits the entrance at the right angle, or if someone makes the wrong frequency of sound, the vibration becomes lethal. It literally shatters the soft tissue inside the body." The watch's hum grew louder, syncopated with a rhythmic thud-thud coming from deeper in the mountain. It was the sound of a massive, water-driven pump. They reached a central chamber where the quartz gave way to a vein of raw silver so thick it looked like frozen lightning. In the center of the room sat a massive iron door, sealed with a wheel lock, that required 3 separate keys. "We only have the watch," Cade said, looking at the 3 keyholes. "No," Reeves said, pointing to the petrified captain near the door. Around the man's neck was a heavy brass chain with a second key. "We have 2, but the third is in the locket Vance carries," a voice echoed from the tunnel behind them. It was Elias, the hollow man. He had followed them, crawling through the dark. His eyes were wilder than ever. "The vulture has the heart. You have the mind. But you need the soul to open the ghost cache."